The Value of Philosophy by Bertrand Russell. Or at least that's the way it's titled in a textbook that I use in my philosophy classes. It's actually just a small portion of a chapter he wrote in a book called The Problems of Philosophy. So Bertrand Russell was born in 1872, died in 1970. He was a philosopher known for his work in mathematics and logic, but he also wrote on things like the philosophy of religion. He actually went to jail for a little while for being a pacifist, for protesting nuclear weapons and protesting the First World War. He was also an atheist. And when I read this short excerpt on the value of philosophy, it was interesting to me to see how he discusses the awe and inspiration of the study of philosophy. And I have all my students read this article in our first class in Introduction to Philosophy, and so I just wanted to go over it with you. So remember, this is the last chapter of a book he wrote called The Problems of Philosophy. I have it back here, but I was looking for it earlier and I can't find it. I'll find it later. Anyway, so it's the last chapter. I'm not going to go through the whole chapter. I'm just going to go through a small portion of it. But it's talking about the value of philosophy. And the purpose is just that. It's in the heading, to talk about why the study of philosophy is valuable. If you're taking my philosophy class, I just gave you an answer. The purpose of the article is to talk about why philosophy is valuable. He actually has a thesis in this short work. He's not only telling you why it's valuable, he's explaining why with several pieces of evidence and reasons. So at the end of this work on Problems of Philosophy, he wants to say, okay, so we've seen all these problems. Now, why is it valuable to even study philosophy? He says, it's necessary we talk about this question in view of the fact that many men, under the influence of science or practical affairs, are inclined to doubt whether philosophy is anything better than innocent but useless trifling, hair-splitting distinctions and controversies on matters concerning which knowledge is impossible. In other words, he's saying we really need to talk about why the study of philosophy is valuable, because there are a lot of people who call themselves practical men or scientific men, who think that the study of philosophy is useless, that it's, well, he says, trifling, making hair-splitting distinctions that don't have any real relevance to the world. Now, a lot of the students that I have in philosophy, they're not taking that class because they want to take philosophy. They're just taking it because it's the one class they need to graduate, or it's the one elective that's available to them that semester. So I'm not like a fool thinking everybody in the philosophy class really digs philosophy. But Bertrand Russell is addressing many of those people who think that philosophy is just a waste of time because there are more practical matters, things that are revealed in science that are more valuable to study and reflect upon in the real world. He thinks that view of philosophy is wrong because they have some basic misunderstandings. So he says, this view of philosophy appears to result partly from a wrong conception of the ends of life, ENDS, the ends of life, and partly from a wrong conception of the kind of goods which philosophy strives to achieve. So these people who think philosophy is a waste of time because they're more practical and scientific, he says they have an incorrect understanding for at least two different reasons. Number one, they seem to have an incorrect understanding of the ends of life, the things for which we make decisions, and partly from a conception or a misconception about the goods, the things that philosophy strives to achieve and understand. So he says physical science, through the medium of inventions, is useful to innumerable people who are wholly ignorant of it. Thus, the study of physical science is to be recommended not only or primarily because of the effect on the student, but rather because of the effect on mankind in general. So he says science has benefits that even people who don't understand science still benefit from. So if you go to the doctor, you don't necessarily know how the medicine works. If you're using the tablets in prison, you don't necessarily know how all that technology works, but you're benefiting from it in a good way. Well, philosophy, its benefits are a little bit different from that. So he says physical science, and he would have said today technology, are important and valuable because of the effect on mankind in general, not necessarily its effect on the individual person. Utility, he says, does not belong to philosophy. If the study of philosophy has any value at all for others than students of philosophy, it must be only indirectly through its effects upon the lives of those who study it. It is in these effects, therefore, if anywhere, that the value of philosophy must be primarily sought. So whereas science affects either negatively but mostly beneficially to all of mankind in general, he says when it comes to philosophy, if you're going to see its value anywhere, it's going to be on the effects of the lives of those who study it. So students of philosophy, looking at them is where you will find why it is valuable. But first, he says, if we're not going to fail in our endeavor to determine the value of philosophy, we must free our minds from the prejudices of what are wrongly called practical men. These practical men, as this word is often used, is one who recognizes only material needs, who realizes that men must have food for the body, but is oblivious of the necessity of providing food for the mind. If all men were well off, if poverty and disease had been reduced to their lowest possible point, there would still remain much to be done to produce a valuable society. And even in the existing world, the goods of the mind are at least as important as the goods of the body. It is exclusively among the goods of the mind that the value of philosophy is to be found. And only those who are not indifferent to these goods can be persuaded that the study of philosophy is not a waste of time. So he says, people that are often referred to as practical men, all they know about things that are good for the body, good for humanity, are material needs, right? So money, power, sex, things that have to do with maybe your health, shelter, transportation, all of these things are your material needs. And the practical man only sees, he doesn't see past that. He doesn't see past the value of anything other than what you need materially. So money and whatever it can provide in terms of shelter, transportation, education, health, or anything like that. He says, but look, even if everyone in the world were cured of disease and was financially well off, right? So the practical man only sees the material needs of the world. That's all he wants to focus on. And Russell's saying, even if everybody had what they needed financially and they were disease-free, there would still be a lot of good that could be done in society. So beyond merely possession of a house, a car, good clothes, good food, good medicine, he says there's still a lot more that could be done, which is valuable to society. And he says that is when you get into the discussion of the goods of the mind. Once all of your bodily needs are taken care of, then you still have the goods of the mind that can be developed, he says, and that is one of the places, because he's going to end up saying there are several places that you can look for the value of philosophy. And he's like, that is where the value of philosophy is to be found. So once you get beyond material needs, if you're the kind of person that can see that and understand that, then you are the only kind of person who can be persuaded that there is value in philosophy. But if you are not the kind of person who can understand why anything beyond food, shelter, sex, and power and money, beyond any of that, you don't understand what's so good about the world or what's valuable about the world, then you're not going to be persuaded that philosophy is valuable at all. Philosophy, like other studies, aims primarily at knowledge. The knowledge it aims at is the kind of knowledge which gives unity and system to the body of the sciences, and the kind which results from a critical examination of the grounds of our convictions, prejudices, and beliefs. But it cannot be maintained that philosophy has had any very great measure of success in its attempts to provide definite answers to its questions. If you ask a mathematician, a mineralogist, a historian, or any other man of learning what definite body of truths has been ascertained by his science, his answer will last as long as you are willing to learn. So philosophy primarily aims at the acquisition of knowledge, building up, developing growth in your knowledge, understanding, and even wisdom. He doesn't say wisdom, but I'm going to include wisdom there. So your growth and development in knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. And the kind of knowledge that philosophy aims at is that kind of knowledge which gives unity and system to the body of the sciences. So if you've listened to my other lectures on the introduction of philosophy, then you will know that one of the things I said there is that philosophy is the mother of all of the sciences or all of the disciplines, and all of the disciplines still answer to it. So it was from philosophy everything came, and to philosophy everything answers. And that's basically what he's saying here, is that philosophy aims at the kind of knowledge which makes sense of all these other sciences. So if you're trying to understand economics or biology or chemistry, philosophy can help you make sense of all of it as a body of knowledge. He says, and the kind which results from a critical examination of the grounds of our convictions, prejudices, and beliefs. So philosophy is not only looking for the kind of knowledge which can help you make sense of the world and everything else, it's also helping you understand what is really the source of the things that you believe, the things that you feel strongly about, but also the things that are your prejudices, the things that you're blind to and your biases. Philosophy is in the business of figuring out the source, the cause, the ground, the foundation for your beliefs, your prejudices, your convictions, and your opinions. But he says, he acknowledges straightforward, right? So he acknowledges straightforward that the answers that philosophy often comes up with can't be claimed to be definite in the same way that mathematics or mineralogy, geology, history, or anybody of the other sciences can claim. In other words, we can talk about mathematical formulas. We can talk about geological structures. We can talk about what happens when you mix this chemical with another chemical. We can talk about what happens in the economy when you have government intervention or no government intervention. We can talk about these things in a scientific manner and come to some sort of conclusions. But a lot of times when we're talking about philosophy, we don't have the same definitive answers to the questions that we seek. It's important that you recognize he's acknowledging that. He's not shying away from the fact that if you're looking for definite answers, then you're not going to find a lot of those definite answers in the study of philosophy. That's one of the things I have to tell the students, is that if you're genuinely interested in philosophy, don't assume that if you just read enough books, read the right authors, that at some point you're going to come to this awe-inspiring knowledge where you understand everything else. You understand the meaning of life and who you really are and all about the world and the mysteries of the universe. That's not going to happen. You will get closer to having knowledge of those things, but there's something that's going to happen to you in the process of studying philosophy that is where we find the value in it. It's not that you come to some definite answers that you can just give back to someone else, but something happens to you in the process of studying and thinking about deep philosophical problems. Russell says if you put the same question to the philosophers, he will, if he's candid, have to confess that his study has not achieved positive results such as have been achieved by other sciences. Again, he's acknowledging the lack of definite answers. He says, it is true that this is partly accounted for by the fact that as soon as definite knowledge concerning any subject becomes possible, this subject ceases to be called philosophy and becomes a separate science. Remember, again, on my other lecture on Intro to Philosophy, what he's saying is, in the history of the world and the history of ideas, what happened is that people who were called philosophers, once they became specialists in a particular area, that area spun off from philosophy and became some other discipline that we call scientific. So botany or meteorology or astronomy or something like that. But everybody who was in the business of understanding the world was originally a philosopher. He says the whole study of the heavens, which now belongs to astronomy, was once included in philosophy. Isaac Newton, his great work was called The Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy. Right? So Isaac Newton, great scientist, he referred to himself as a natural philosopher. Similarly, the study of the human mind, which was a part of philosophy, has now been separated from philosophy and has become the science of psychology. Thus, to a great extent, the uncertainty of philosophy is more apparent than real. Those questions which are already capable of definite answers are placed in the sciences, while those only to which, at present, no definite answer can be given remain to form the residue which is called philosophy. So philosophy is really like the source from which all these other sciences and disciplines came, and as they become more definite and certain and have more tangible effects on the world, there still remain these questions of philosophy that are yet to be given clear, definite answers. This is, however, only a part of the truth concerning the uncertainty of philosophy. There are many questions, among them those that are of the profoundest interest to our spiritual life, which, so far as we can see, must remain insoluble to the human intellect unless its powers become of a quite different order from what they are now. So he's saying there are some questions which are, he says, insoluble, like impenetrable. It's not going to be possible for us to understand these things unless the human intellect and its powers become of a quite different order from what they are now. So unless humans at some point become much smarter than they actually are, have some sort of deeper insight into the meaning of the universe, there are always going to be questions, important, profound questions, which remain impenetrable, which are just going to continue to be mysterious and elusive, always just beyond our grasp and understanding. So he gives a couple of examples of these kind of questions. He says, has the universe any unity of plan or purpose? Or is it a fortuitous concourse of atoms? So if you're a religious believer, if you believe in God, then you're going to say that the universe does have a plan and a purpose. Well, for him, remember, he was an atheist, and so he was looking to science to provide some sort of unity or plan or purpose. And there isn't one very clear there. That's one of the things that current scientists are still working towards, is like this all-encompassing theory of the universe. So one question will be, has the universe any unity or plan or purpose, or is it just a fortuitous concourse of atoms? Another question is consciousness a permanent part of the universe, giving hope of indefinite growth in wisdom? Or is it a transitory accident on a small planet on which life must ultimately become impossible? Is there any meaning to the fact that we are conscious and we are aware of who we are and what we do? We can make predictions in the world. We are much more rational than other beings in the world. Is there any real reason or purpose for that? Or is that just an accident? There's no real significance to our planet in the millions of other planets and solar systems. Are good and evil of importance to the universe or only to man? So when it comes to nature, just nature, blind nature, do the ideas of good and evil make sense? Do they apply to nature at all? Or only to us, only to people who can think rationally about these questions? Now, again, if you're religious, then you have a text. It's either the Bible or the Quran or some other holy text that gives you some of the answers here. But remember, he's trying to think about this philosophically and not being dependent on any sort of divine revelation because he's an atheist. However, I don't want to get away from the idea that if you are religious, that all of these questions are actually answered definitively, because they're not. Christian and Muslim philosophers will tell you that what the scripture says only takes you so far. There are still many questions that are unanswered, and that is where they come in and try to study the reasonability of answers to questions about the universe and meaning of life. Now I'm going to skip down a couple of paragraphs if you're following along with the book that you got at the library, or maybe you own the book. But then he says, the value of philosophy is in fact to be sought largely in its very uncertainty. So note, he's already given us several indications of where the value of philosophy is to be sought. It's to be sought in the goods of the mind. It's to be sought in the effects that it has on those who study it. It's to be sought in its uncertainty about certain answers to these deep, probing questions. The man who has no tincture of philosophy goes through life imprisoned in the prejudices derived from common sense, from the habitual beliefs of his age or his nation, and from convictions which have grown up in his mind without the cooperation or consent of deliberate reason. To me, that's pretty hardcore. So he says there are three kinds of people who have no interest in philosophy, or not three kinds of people, but he is describing people who don't pay any attention to things like philosophy. He says, one, those people are imprisoned in the prejudices derived from common sense. So if you are of an intellectual of any sort, you're interested in the study of religion or history or politics or anything like that, then you may have encountered people who think that you're just weird for pursuing stuff that they don't feel is relevant. But they also think that all of the important questions in life are answered by common sense, right? And what he's saying is that common sense, I mean, number one, he didn't say this in the article, but common sense is not common. All right. I mean, if you ask somebody who is older than you about how they might understand or deal with a situation, it'll be different if you ask someone from a different country or a different culture. So common sense is not really common at all. And he says, if you are uninterested in things like philosophy and the answers that they provide, then you're going to stay stuck, imprisoned in your prejudices that you think are derived from common sense. But you're wrong, and they are prejudices, meaning that they are unfounded ideas and beliefs and behaviors that you just got from who knows where. The other thing that a person who is uninterested in the study of philosophy is imprisoned in is his habitual beliefs, the habitual beliefs of his age or his nation. So there are certain things in our time which we believe, not because we've studied or reflected on those ideas, but just because everybody around us believes that. There are things that our nation, America, believes that maybe other countries and nations don't believe, like our understanding of things like freedom and justice. Maybe people in other countries don't necessarily understand freedom or justice that way. We believe those things. It's just a part of who we are because of the country we've grown up in. Something that is often referred to in other like textbooks about different cultures is how America is very individualistic, that we are all about being autonomous, independent, being our own self-made man, whereas in other cultures, they might be more concerned with community and family. So we might grow up with this individualistic mindset, not realizing that that's just something we got from our culture or our nation. It's the same way with the age in which we live. We take things for granted, largely things in science that people in other ages didn't know or didn't understand. And then there are going to be people in the future who look back at us as if we are ignorant because we believed certain things about science or the world. Racism is a pretty good example because 100 years ago, people were trying to make use of science to prove that people were inferior or superior according to like the size of their skulls and their skin color. Now, looking back, we realize that that was very ignorant, but that same thing is going to happen to people 100 years from now looking back on us. So a person who is uninterested in reflecting on the things he believes is going to stay imprisoned in the ideas of his age, his nation, and things he thinks are common sense. And all of these are really what he also says, convictions which have grown up in our minds without our cooperation or consent of deliberate reason, meaning that there are a ton of things that we believe and we don't know why we believe them, we just believe them. It's not that we've thought about them, we've studied them, we've reflected on them, we've talked to anybody else about them, we just believe them. And many times those things that we believe could be hurting us. They could be false, they could be immoral, they could be hindering us from progress. And as far as Bertrand Russell is concerned, if you were into the study of philosophy, you would then see the value in studying things that you think are common sense or what's distinctive among your nation, your culture, or the age in which you lived. To such a man, the world tends to become definite, finite, obvious. Common objects rouse no objections, no questions, and unfamiliar possibilities are contemptuously rejected. Unfamiliar possibilities are contemptuously rejected. This is the person who encounters some new idea, some new way of looking at things, and rejects it with contempt, looks condescendingly at it, makes fun of it, thinks it's weird or confusing or some new age stuff, and just completely writes it off. But he says, as soon as we begin to philosophize, we realize that even the most everyday things can lead to problems to which only very incomplete answers can be given. Philosophy, though unable to tell us with certainty what is the true answer to our doubts which it raises, is able to suggest many possibilities which enlarge our thoughts and free them from the tyranny of custom. This emphasis he places on philosophy and it's enlarging our conception of the world because it adds all of these other possibilities to our mind is really important. And he's going to sum it up by making reference to that. Thus, he says, while diminishing our feeling of certainty as to what things are, philosophy, greatly increases our knowledge as to what they may be. It removes the somewhat arrogant dogmatism of those who have never traveled into the region of liberating doubt, and it keeps alive our sense of wonder by showing familiar things in an unfamiliar aspect. Apart from its utility in showing unsuspected possibilities, don't let that get by you. He thinks that our knowledge or the growth in our understanding of possibilities we had never thought of is useful to us. He says, apart from that, philosophy has a value. He says, perhaps its chief value, through the greatness of the objects which it contemplates, and the freedom from narrow and personal aims resulting from this contemplation. So the value of philosophy is to be sought in the goods of the mind. It's to be sought in the effects it has on those who study it. It's to be sought in the uncertainty of the questions, and it's to be sought in the greatness of the objects which it contemplates, and the freedom from narrow and personal aims resulting from this contemplation. I have done another commentary where I walked through a letter by Martin Luther King Jr., and it seems to me, makes very clear reference to something very similar to this when he talks about the purpose of education to develop our critical thinking intensively, sift and weigh evidence, but also because it enlarges our conception and gives us worthy objects upon which to contemplate. That's what he says, that a good education gives us worthy objects upon which to contemplate. And it seems to me he's echoing Bertrand Russell here. He says, the life of the instinctive man, so this is the man who just believes in common sense and the stuff of his country and his age, the instinctive man is shut up within the circle of his private interests. Family and friends may be included, but the outer world is not regarded except as it may help or hinder what comes within the circle of instinctive wishes. Other people in the world and other things in the world are unimportant to this person, except to the degree that they can help or hurt his own agenda. In such a life, there is something feverish and confined, in comparison with which the philosophic life is calm and free. The private world of instinctive interests is a small one, set in the midst of a great and powerful world which must sooner or later lay our private world in ruins. If you have begun this process of getting an education while you're incarcerated, one of the things I know has happened is that your understanding of the world is enlarged to such a degree that you and your life and your own interests seem very, very, very small. And that's basically what he is getting at, is that the greater world around us is so much bigger and larger that our own interests become minuscule. He says, unless we can enlarge our interests as to include the whole outer world, we remain like a garrison in a beleaguered fortress, knowing that the enemy prevents escape and that ultimate surrender is inevitable. Keep in mind the image he's creating of this person who is uninterested in philosophical reflection. Now, I'm not saying that a person needs to become a philosopher or study philosophy over automotive mechanics or accounting, and neither is Bertrand Russell. He's just saying if you are uninterested in this kind of inquiry and this kind of thinking about important ideas, these are the images that he is creating. This is a man who is imprisoned to his prejudices of common sense, or what he thinks are common sense. This is a man who doesn't see past material needs like shelter, food, clothing, sex, money, and power. This is a man who he says is like a garrison in a beleaguered fortress. So someone who is shut in a fortress knowing that there's no escape from the enemy on the outside. In such a life, he says, there is no peace, but a constant strife between the insistence of desire and the powerlessness of will. In one way or another, if our life is to be great and free, we must escape this prison and this strife. His references to being imprisoned in our own mind and the idea that we need to escape this prison must be very relevant to you in prison. He is talking to free world folks, or at least he thought he was only talking to free world folks, about the intellectual goods of the mind and how if we disregard them, we are imprisoned in our mind. But this whole analogy he's making about being chained and bound in prison in our mind should be very clear to you why it is relevant, not merely because you are in prison, but you know and you realize that all of the education that you get, all of the things that you learn and grow and develop while you're on the inside can't be taken away from you. And the larger your conception of the world, the more free, in a sense, you become. So now I'm skipping a few pages in the actual book, but I'm going to end it here. He says, thus, to sum up our discussion of the value of philosophy, philosophy is to be studied not for the sake of any definite answers to its questions, since no definite answers can, as a rule, be known to be true, but rather for the sake of the questions themselves. Because these questions enlarge our conception of what is possible, enrich our intellectual imagination, and diminish the dogmatic assurance which closes the mind against speculation. But above all, because through the greatness of the universe which philosophy contemplates, the mind also is rendered great and becomes capable of that union with the universe which constitutes its highest good. Now, when I read that last line, with like the way that he describes the value of philosophy, it was ironic to me that he's an atheist. He didn't believe in anything supernatural or transcendent. For him, what gave him that sense of transcendence or unity with something beyond himself was the study of philosophy. Listen to the way he says that. But above all, the value of philosophy should be studied above all, because through the greatness of the universe which philosophy contemplates, the mind also is rendered great and becomes capable of that union with the universe which constitutes its highest good. He sounds very Platonic. He sounds very Aristotelian. These are ancient Greek philosophers when he says that about being one with the universe, which is the highest good, the thing that is of most importance to humankind. And we do that through our contemplation of philosophical questions. So that's the value of philosophy. It's to be found in the goods of the mind, in the effects that it has on students, in the uncertainty of the questions, and in the thing upon which we contemplate, the greatness of the things that we contemplate. When we contemplate those things, we become capable of that union with the universe, which constitutes our highest good.